We are looking at Scottdale, Pennsylvania, for the third time. And once again, we're going to see how the place developed. When you look at this picture of early Scottdale, you might think you're looking at Pittsburgh, because these things are a blast furnace and the things that accompany a blast furnace. The stoves over here, you could call them, things that produce some of the hot blast that goes up through this big tube that provides some of the current of air going through there, help the coke melt the ore in there that they're breaking down, melting. This is another view of that same thing. You can see how Scottdale is developing in the meantime. What we see here is Charlotte Furnace that we were just looking at. Charlotte Furnace and the rolling mill were put in there in the early 1880s. Next thing we see will be the rolling mill over here. This is the mill, the rolling mill, where they took steel from the furnace and rolled it into usable sheets of steel. This shows the interior of that operation. These are the sheets of steel that they would put through the rollers here. And these levers would gauge the rollers to the exact width or thickness they wanted the steel. And they got this guy to stand here. He doesn't look too happy about it. These are the guys who worked there. They are people who could have told you a lot more about the operation than I can. In 1882, when this woodcut was made, you can see how Scottdale was developing. This shows the rolling mill at that time. And as time went by, it increased in size. You can see how it got bigger. In the background is the farmhouse of the Laux family. This was their farm that they subdivided into a town that got the name Scottdale attached to it. This down here is the rolling mill that we had been looking at. Now we get a look at some of the early citizens of the town. This was N.L.K. Klein, Dr. Klein, an early dentist in the town. Also, he was part of the government of the town when it was incorporated as a borough. He was also the first magistrate in the town. O.B. Robertson, Oliver Bovard Robertson, another early citizen of the town, also involved in the town's early government. Robertson had been a Civil War veteran. After the war, he got involved in the building trade. And when Scottdale was just starting, well, they needed people who could build houses, and that's what he did. He was one of the people who were part of the beginnings of the town. Another people who was in on that early project was David F. Stoner. I don't have a photo of him, but this was his house, a brick house built along what became called Pittsburgh Street, and it was built before the town was there. This was his house, mapped after the town got a start. Right beside Stoner's house was Stoner Street. Right down the street was the railroad tracks and the railroad station. The town was building up. This mapping from 1876 shows you right in the middle here what we were looking at. Charlotte Furnace, the rolling mill, and the town as it was developing. Next, we're going to see something down here. This was a brickyard early on, but it eventually became replaced by a foundry and machine shop. This is the place where the railroad, Jacobs Creek, and one of the early roads meet. That is what that area looks like today. That is the building that's there today. This is Jacobs Creek going by. This is the railroad. This is Brown Street. This is what replaced the brickyard. It was first of all made out of wood. This was a machine shop and foundry, which it continued being. And this is a good woodcut of it, showing it when it was still a wooden structure. And it became replaced by this building right here. This is brick, and that building is still here. This is around 1920. In the background, you can see the rolling mill. This is the railroad. The foundry and machine shop started to make as one of their staple products steam engines, which were very important at that time because when those things started out, electric motors were just being invented in the 1880s, and the Industrial Revolution needed of motive power to turn the wheels. This is that very building right here. And this is the guy who took that photograph, H.J. Springer, early photographer of the town, and he produced a book in 1910, and pictures that you see in this little video are from his book. We were looking at the foundry and machine shop down here, and next we go up this way. Going up north, we'll get to see a lumber mill and a few other things. This is the lumber mill. Because the town was just starting out, they needed lumber, doors, windows. The mill was started by the Laux brothers, who had subdivided their farm to begin a town. It was then sold after about 9 years to a guy named Ruth, who continued in business there for a while. This was a distillery. This was a brewery. This was another lumber mill. This was the Ruth Lumber Company, still there around 1950. This was the streetcar viaduct going by. The lumber mill was also a place where you could buy supplies. They sold gravel and sand and coal, and these are the old trucks from the 1920s. Streetcars, right by there. This was the waiting room. Right up above there was a place where caskets were made. Here's the casket company. This was 1939. What I'm going to do is focus in on this. This is the streetcar viaduct I told you about, right here, this dark form. This is the lumber mill that we were looking at. Over here is the place that they made caskets. Right here was where the waiting station was for waiting for a trolley. Up here was a place where cutlery was made. And I think at this point I've probably said enough. And I'm going to shut this operation down right now. And I'll say so long, and I'll see you again when I do another one on Scottdale. So bye now.